Hello everyone and welcome back to Closet Gaming. Today I'm attempting to make a top 5 video of some of the largest gaming controversies that have ever took place in the gaming world. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you do, please consider giving me a thumbs up here on YouTube, subscribing to the channel, maybe even leaving a comment on any of the topics. And without further ado, here's the video. Number 5. False Promises in No Man's Sky. It all started in 2013 at VGX, where Hello Games introduced No Man's Sky, one of the most ambitious games ever conceived. It was supposed to be a first-person sci-fi adventure game like none before it. Every planet procedural, every planet unique, every planet unexplored. That was the central message of the game. Everything ranging from each solar system to the smallest animals was supposed to be procedurally generated and thus unique. But Hello Games took upon themselves more than they could handle. They promised things that they just couldn't deliver. Just a quick look at some of the things they promised but didn't deliver. Planetary physics, large fleets of spaceships, in-atmosphere spaceship battles, landing on asteroids, and not to mention a multiplayer element to the game. But these and many other promises remained unfulfilled at launch. And while some of them have been implemented into the game as of this moment, just saying the name No Man's Sky still leaves a bitter taste in many gamers' mouths. So what exactly happened with No Man's Sky? It was a combination of 3 factors, the usual suspects: overconfidence, hype, and panic. Hype is something we should all be very afraid of, but video game developers should be among those who fear it the most. It is the reason why even good games crash and burn. Hype. That is the thing that happens when people have unrealistic expectations. You're likely to have it happen to you almost every day. Your friend tells you that the movie was great, but then you only think it was good and are disappointed. But when the whole industry, including the media, jumps on the hype train, it becomes deadly. People thought that No Man's Sky would be a game changer, that it would be the game that would lead to procedural generation becoming the new industry standard, replacing hand-built worlds with worlds randomly generated by algorithms. Everyone saw No Man's Sky as the game that they wanted, but only a few had the self-control to actually stop and figure out whether those wants were realistic. Overconfidence can't really be blamed at anyone else other than Hello Games themselves. They started with a vision of a game that would change the industry forever and mark the annals of the video game industry. And to be honest, they probably had a chance of achieving that. But there's always a but. If they only were more concise with their vision instead of trying to achieve everything. If only they were honest, not only with the consumers, but primarily with themselves. Maybe then they could have created something truly great. And lastly, it was the panic on the side of Hello Games. The media silence that accompanied the complaints as the game launched just made everything into an even bigger problem. It created a media image of lying instead of incompetence. And people can forgive incompetence, but they can never forget lies. In the end, No Man's Sky wasn't a bad game. The people who managed to stay off the hype train can honestly say that. but it was plagued with unfulfilled promises, failed expectations, and a deafening silence when the truth came out. As the studio regained its composure and started patching the game, adding at least some of the promised missing features, No Man's Sky actually became a good game. But nonetheless, it was already too late. Number 4. Sex in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas or the Hot Coffee mod? Sex. This is always a controversial topic, though I can't for the life of me figure out why. Sex is the most natural thing for a large portion of living beings. But nonetheless, the discovery of a sex minigame in GTA San Andreas in 2005 was a big deal. The reasons why it became a big thing were slightly different, yet exactly the same as what you might expect. It was ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, who gathered the main force behind this controversy because of their decision to change the game's rating from mature to adults only because of this hidden sex minigame. So what exactly was the Hot Coffee mod? It was a sexual minigame in GTA San Andreas which allowed the player to control the protagonist while he was engaging in sexual behavior with one of his 6 potential girlfriends in the game. But initially, nobody really knew that it was in the game. Then, the Hot Coffee mod came. At the beginning, Rockstar denied that this mod was part of the game, but when it was discovered the sexual minigame was accessible on consoles as well, it was pretty obvious it was in the game files and not added on by modders. This discovery sparked quite a bit of controversy, getting harsh words from especially the American politicians, ending with the Family Entertainment Protection Act introduced by Hillary Clinton, Joe Lieberman, and even Bay, and a lawsuit by the city of Los Angeles against Take-Two Interactive. A class action lawsuit against Take-Two was also brought to the court, but fewer than 2,700 people actually responded to the class action lawsuits, and Take-Two settled with those for the allegations of consumer fraud for about $20 million. Apart from the US, where the ESRB announced that they are changing the game's rating from mature to adults only, the game suffered actually a much more dire fate in Australia, where the game was banned from sale for a period of time before a patched version without a sexual minigame was introduced. In Europe, nobody really cared, as the game was already rated for adults only, 18+, and thus no changes needed to be introduced to the game's rating. This was one of the gaming controversies I never really understood. Perhaps that is because I come from Europe, where the Puritanical Christians lost their power over the society decades ago. But what confuses me is this. Since the age of consent, the age from which we allow children to have sex at is ranging from 14 to 18 years old, with the most common being 16 in the United States and 15 in Europe. Why do we prohibit the children that can have sex from viewing sexual content? And why do we pretend like they don't look at it either way? It just seems hypocritical. Number 3. Video games, violence, and Mortal Kombat. Controversial video games aren't anything new, and no gaming series is better proof of this than Mortal Kombat. Back in the early 1990s, moral panic ensued when the first Mortal Kombat game came to the market, but nobody was expecting such a reaction. A moral outrage that would lead to the creation of modern rating systems as we know them today. It was in 1992 when the United States Senator Herb Kohl used footage from Mortal Kombat to argue for the need for government regulation of video games. What certainly didn't help to defuse the situation either was the way Sega decided to promote the game. Using a commercial that showed a boy being aggressive right after he had played and won a game of Mortal Kombat only frightened and outraged the public even more. But what sparked the most amount of controversy was a feature inherent to the game itself, the fatality system. A system now beloved with fond memories by many gamers was the thing people were outraged the most about, fearing that children would get influenced by the amount of blood and gore. It may come as a surprise to some of you that this time it was Europe that responded the quickest. But it will be less of a surprise when you hear what country it was. Germany. The German Federal Department of Media Harmful to Young Persons, or die Bundesprüfstelle für jugendgefährdende Medien, confiscated almost all the copies of the game and banned it from sale. This ban actually lasted up until the year 2005. Japan also stepped in, but in a much less punitive way, censoring the game by changing the red blood to green blood and turning the screen black whenever a fatality was supposed to happen. But even this isn't really the reason why Mortal Kombat's controversies are remembered and cited to this day. It was the tragedy of the Columbine High School Massacre in 1999, where a total of 15 people died. 12 students, 1 teacher, and the 2 perpetrators themselves. It was attorney Jack Thompson who sued the producers of not only Mortal Kombat, but also the producers of Doom and Quake because he alleged that it was at least partially the fault of these games that the perpetrators played quite a bit that the attack happened. But he sued unsuccessfully. Nonetheless, it was this that created the image of video games as causing violence in the eyes of the public. This is why to this day we have to listen to allegations of video games causing violence whenever a tragedy involving a gamer takes place. This is the reason why gaming is still used as a scapegoat for more serious issues taking place, especially in the United States. And even though numerous studies have shown that video game violence has no impact on aggression of youth or people in general, we gamers continue to be unjustly persecuted for this public image created in the 90s. Sadly, we cannot really do much against it, apart from waiting for the next generation of politicians that grew up playing games themselves to come into office and see whether they will be more kind to us gamers. Number 2. Loot boxes, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and the monetization of games. Let us now move back to the present, or at least closer to the present with our second to last controversy. Let's talk about Star Wars Battlefront 2's loot boxes. If by some miracle you don't know what loot boxes are, I envy you. Loot boxes are special items which are often available in games that when opened give you the chance to get some of the in-game items. And I got to warn you guys here, I'm very critical of loot boxes. I despise them. But nonetheless, I will try to be as impartial as I can be when taking a look at this controversy that might change the gaming world once again. Nowadays, the undeniably most profitable way to monetize games isn't just to sell them at $60 a pop. Nowadays, the way to do it is using microtransactions. As a recent study performed by Superdata shows, so-called service-based monetization has provided gaming companies with more than double the revenue compared to just sales of full games. $22 billion in microtransactions and sales of additional content compared to $8 billion in full game sales in 2017 alone. EA's approach to monetization of their games has been a point of contention for quite some time now actually, but it is hard to blame companies for trying to make as much profit as they possibly can, as we tend to forget that is actually their goal, to be profitable. But in the end of 2017, EA finally faced a backlash by enraged gamers who have been finally fed up with systems that aren't designed to provide fun at all, but they are designed purely to generate as much profit as possible. Battlefront 2's progression system was tied into the microtransaction system so heavily the game got called a $60 pay-to-win game. And if there's anything gamers hate, it's pay-to-win games. But that was only the beginning. The controversy grew so large that it sparked a bigger flame. A flame of a crusade. A crusade against loot boxes in general. This time it was the Belgian Minister of Justice, Koen Geens, who took charge and called for a Europe-wide ban of loot boxes. And why? He and the people who oppose loot boxes, and again, I feel that I need to remind that I am one of these people, argue that loot boxes are nothing but gambling hiding in plain sight that is totally available to children. Because of the random nature of loot boxes and the fact that they are purchasable with real-world money, an argument was formed that on a psychological level they act very similarly to slot machines, always giving you the hope that the next loot or spin will be the one that wins. Add to that the commonly used flashy effects when opening loot boxes that are very similar to the flashy lights going off when you play on a slot machine, and the analogy is complete. Many other officials have since called for the investigation of loot boxes. In February, a Washington senator, Kevin Ranker, even introduced a bill that would regulate loot boxes, and in Europe, many games and companies are under investigation for their business practices, with the Netherlands even determining that some of them actually did or do still break their laws. The question now remains, what will happen to loot boxes? Will they be regulated, or will the market with them remain a wild west where companies make massive profits? Nobody really knows. We will have to see what the future has in store for us, but I do hope that some sort of a solution will be found. Number 1. Ethics and misogyny in gaming, aka Gamergate. Last of all, we can't really talk about gaming controversies without addressing the biggest one, Gamergate. This controversy still lives in the hearts of many, even though it happened back in 2014. And really, it was actually two different controversies tied under a single name. One of the controversies was about ethics in gaming journalism, and the other was about issues of sexism and racism in video game culture. So let's start with the less controversial part of Gamergate, the ethics of video game journalism. If you take this look at Gamergate, then you can call it a consumer revolt against video game journalism. Taking a look at the Gamergate wiki, it says it can be summarized into three basic categories: corruption, collusion, and censorship. Corruption in gaming journalism can actually be classified pretty easily, as it was about a conflict of interest between gaming journalists and the websites they often work for and the advertisers on those platforms. Here, people argued that the journalists were pushed towards granting games better scores because otherwise the developers and publishers wouldn't advertise on their platforms. Collusion is much harder, Here, the claim is that one particular narrative was pushed, and it was the narrative that Gamergate wasn't about ethics, but purely about sexism and racism in gaming. Censorship is similar to collusion, but this time the claim is that there were direct cases of not allowing people to voice their opinions. The other side of the controversy was much more controversial. It got much more public support from traditional gaming journalism venues. Here, it was all about sexism and racism in video game culture. Some of the largest gaming journalism venues, including sites like Vox, Wired, Polygon, or Kotaku, argued that the supporters of Gamergate were not much more than sexist, racist people who are trying to fight against the change of gaming culture, which has, for the most part, been male-dominated. Their argument centered around the fact that people included in the controversy, like Zoe Quinn, Brianna Wu, or Anita Sarkeesian, were subjected to harsh social media campaigns, which included instances of doxing, threats of sexual violence, or even death threats. And those were a proof in their mind of inherent misogyny and racism permeating the gaming culture. Neither side of the controversy really won the argument, while both will claim that it was their side that was the clear winner. Pro-Gamergaters will claim that because of the controversy, many companies pulled their ads from sites which have been practicing unethical video game journalism, while the people who were against Gamergate claimed that their side achieved a victory by getting the traditional view of a gamer as a man into question. I personally think that Gamergate, at least originally, was about ethics in journalism. But on the other hand, I'm more than willing to acknowledge the fact that there were many people who, instead of attempting to debate, went and performed personal attacks or even threatened the safety of the people involved. And I don't condone that behavior in the least. That behavior is clearly atrocious and nobody should ever do these things. Yet I think that video game journalism also had its part of the blame by not being totally ethical. The last thing that should be noted towards the Gamergate controversy is the fact that it played a large role in sparking what is now known as the culture war. But that isn't a topic related to gaming at large, and thus we will not look at it in detail.